Yo, what's going on, guys? Just Top Deck here. Just wanted to bring you guys a video today talking about what I think will be the most busted team comp in the game that's going to be arriving quite soon in patch 1.2. I don't see a lot of people talking about it, and I think we should bring some attention to this. I know some people are excited for the new characters like Blade and Kafka and even characters in 1.1, but I want to bring to your attention that characters like Kafka and Luka are what I'm going to be talking about today. I think they are more impressive and important in the game's longevity, and also if you're looking for a new playstyle as well. So the reason being is because they bring something that we don't have already to the table, which is dots. And the way that they do dots is extraordinary, right? It's not just like simple, I'm going to lay down a dot and call that a day, right? They are built into their kit, right? Like dots are a core part of their game plan and their rotation. When you think dots, you think Kafka and you think Luka, right? Like these two are what prime examples of what a dot team should consist of and have, and they are must-haves actually if you want to run a dot team. Kafka and Luka, I can't even say one or the other is greater because they both provide and bring excellent stuff to your team. So when you're considering your team for dots, those two are mandatory. And it can get to the point where type advantage doesn't really matter anymore because you're just dishing out so much damage with the dots. And since they don't focus on break or other things like that, it's not like damage is being left off the table. You'll see what I mean when we discuss their kits a little bit just now, but trust me when I say that these two characters are quite literally insane and are must. Right. Starting off, let's talk about everyone's favorite, Kafka. Right. Why is Kafka so good? Why would you want her? What is the point of Kafka? Well, Kafka is a 5-star electric unit that specializes in AoE damage and specializes in dots on top of that. Her main gimmick is whenever she applies a dot, she can just continuously dish out damage as long as that character has a dot on them, right? Via her ult or skill, as long as there's a dot, she will just pump out an absurd amount of damage and continuously gain advantage on top of that, right? So let's currently break down Kafka's kit real quick, right? So if we look at her skill, Caressing Moonlight, skill Blast. It deals lightning damage equal to 160. This is at level 10, of course. Before we get into this, take these skills here and numbers here with a grain of salt. These have been recently leaked and they're from the CBT 1.2. These are supposed to be the final versions of their skills, right? But Hoyo can always change it as they see fit. But get it back into it. Kafka's skill deals lightning damage equal to 160 of Kafka's attack to target enemy, and lightning damage equal 60% of Kafka's attack to enemies adjacent to it. If the target enemy is currently receiving dot, all dots placed on that enemy immediately produces damage equal to 90% of the original damage. So what does this mean, really? As I said earlier, Kafka is an integral part to a dot team. Why is that? Because of this right here. Her skill allows you to essentially pop the dots that is on somebody. Pop it being you just activate the dots, you trigger it, but the dots still remain. So you're getting 2 portions of damage. 1 from the activation and 2 from the actual dot of itself. So think of it like this. You know how an enemy would receive dot damage at the end of every turn or at the beginning of every turn, right? If you use Kafka's skill and they have a dot, the skill deals damage and it produces, right, or generates damage on top of that if they have a dot. So that dot damage gets blasted to them immediately and then they take the dot damage. So it's 2 portions of dot damage that they are technically dealing with this skill. That is incredible, right? Now, it's not just shock, it's all dots currently placed on that target. And that's something you need to keep in mind. This is really important. All dots. That stipulation, all dots, is what makes Kafka fantastic and why she synergizes so well with other dot users. So an example of this would be if you have wind share on somebody and you have shock, you use Kafka's skill, it pops the wind share and the shock, and then afterwards when the dot actually has to proc, it will then proc. It's fantastic. All dots on. It is a big chunk of damage if you can stack up multiple dots. So let's look at her ult next, right? Twilight Trill ultimate, right? AoE. Deals lightning damage equal to 80% of Kafka's attack to all enemies with a 100% base chance, right? For enemies hit to become shocked and immediately take damage equal to 100% of the dot. Now, the 100% base chance, we can always increase that with effect hit rate, because from what it looks like, they also nerfed enemies' effect resistances, so that's good. So that means this is more likely to land for us. And on top of that, if we add in a little bit of extra effect hit rate, this will essentially guarantee it, because when you go up into higher levels, enemies' effect hit rate increases. So as long as we can find that barrier where it won't matter and we can always land it, that is where we want to be. But 100% base chance works out just fine for now. And the shock will last for 2 turns. While shocked, enemies receive lightning dot equal to 290% of Kafka's attack at the beginning of each turn. This value right here at the bottom, this is going to be huge, right? 299% is huge of Kafka's attack, right? Her ultimate is great because it synergizes with her skill. So at the beginning of each turn, right, they're dealing an enormous amount of damage on top of you double proccing it, right? This number is actually higher in conjunction with her skill and the rest of stuff in her kit. So when you're looking at Kafka, you're looking at a huge damage increase and a huge damage percentage overall with these dots. If we move on to her talent next, right? After an ally of Kafka uses basic attack on an enemy, Kafka immediately launches a follow-up attack and deals lightning damage equal to 120% of her attack to the enemy with a 100% base chance, right? That again, the 100% base chance is so important, of increasing the dot damage received by the target by 20% for 2 turns. This effect can only be triggered 1 time per turn. This, as I said, it follows up with the rest of her kit, just flat out increasing the damage the enemy is going to be taking from dots. Okay? It's incredible, because when you look at it, there is no stipulation saying only shock or lightning damage. It's just flat out dot damage, and that's what we want to see. Just that stipulation of just flat out dot damage that they receive by 20%. That is great. Like her talent is basically is what you would find on a light cone, to be honest with you. And having that on a talent is kind of crazy. It is single target, which isn't too bad. Then for her technique, it's just a little bit more dots, right? It deals lightning damage to all enemies. In addition, each enemy has a 100% base chance of being shocked. While shocked, enemies receive 182% of Kafka's attack as a dot at the beginning of each turn, right? So you would pop her technique first, of course, and then everything just flows into each other so seamlessly, just like that. Like it's crazy. So with her kit essentially talked about, from her skills to her technique, what do we have here? We have a character that synergizes with dots as a whole. Quantum, wind, burn, bleed, everything you can think of, she synergizes with it. As long as that character has a dot, she is here for it. Her damage in conjunction with other characters is going to skyrocket as well. Even Kafka by herself on like a non-dot team, let's say you replace Jing Yuan or Saval with Kafka, oh my god, that's going to be huge. A damage increase is going to be massive because of dots, right? And I'm pretty sure other characters you're gonna have can also have a chance to inflict as well. So it's like, hey, what are we really doing here? Besides just dishing out an insane amount of damage. If we look at Kafka's like traces, right? This is where things get a little bit crazy with Kafka. Do you guys remember her Eidolon 1, what it used to be? Her Eidolon 1 used to be this, right? They replaced her old Eidolon 1 with this. So it became a talent. You know how crazy that is? Not a talent, but a trace. Do you know how crazy that is that it became a trace? It is a core passive to her now. This is a huge buff for Kafka, just in general, right? Of course, her Eidolon 1 is still fantastic. It is crazy. It just simply buffs her damage even more. It is wild what they did with her Eidolon. But this is also an important part, right? A talent has a 20% increased base chance to increase the dot that the enemies receive, right? So her talent goes up to 120%, which is okay, cool. As I said, the higher the base chance, the better, because enemies have more resist the higher we get in the game. And the ultimate has a 30% increased base chance to shock enemies. So, what does this do? This increases the base chance. Oh, actually, I am incorrect about that. It's actually torture. Torture was the Eidolon 1. My bad. I'm sorry. I read that incorrectly. So when using the ultimate, instead of immediately receiving damage from the shock state, enemy targets will now immediately receive damage from all currently applied dot sources. So this is the big thing that you want to look out for, right? Her talent torture, right? This with her ult means that every dot gets popped, right? With her ultimate. The same way her skill would do it, her ultimate now does it. And because her ultimate now does it, that's like 2 sources for you to essentially just dish out an enormous amount of damage. So when you look at this, her kit, I'm gonna like ignore some of her Eidolons. Well, her Eidolons and her Lycone, because that's not really relevant. If we're going to look at her at like just base, right? At her kit alone, because she's a 5-star. Looking at her Eidolons is a little bit I don't want to say it's unnecessary, but like it's realistic to just have the 1 copy. But if you want like more copies, of course, you would want to stop at Eidolon 2, because Eidolon 2 is, while she's on the field, the dot damage dealt by all allies increases by 20%, and I don't need to explain why that's absolutely insane. 20% extra damage by her just being on the field, all dots. All these numbers go up by 20%, and all your allies as well. Come on, that's just insane. If you want to talk about Eidolons, stop at Eidolon 2. That is simply all you need to stop at. Even her Lycone is also crazy. Let's briefly talk about that, I guess. You don't need to run speed boots on her because you gain what, 14.8% extra speed by having the her Lycone. And all it does is increases her damage. And if the enemy has a dot on them, you just deal more damage to them. Right? It's nice. It's nice. It's nice, but it's not needed. But getting back to it, her torture passive. This is what you want, right? The torture passive combined with everything else syncs up, and it just creates an endless loop of a lot of damage, endless source of damage. And let's now look at Luka, right? Remember, these are all leaked from the CBT 1.2, are subject to change. You can take these with a grain of salt, but these are most likely what the end result is going to be for kids. He's a physical bleed machine. There is no other way to really describe him besides, if you want to focus on bleed, Luka is your guy, right? his whole kit revolves around putting your enemy in a state where they bleed and they just suffer. That's it. Combine that with Kafka, you'll see what you're going to get into, right? So let's look at his skill. Lacerating Fist, single target. You deal physical damage equal to 120% of Luka's attack to a target enemy. In addition, there's a 100% base chance. That 100%, it's popping up a lot with these dot characters. Once again, it's really important. To cause the target to bleed for 3 turns. While bleeding at the start of each turn, the enemy will take 16% of their HP as a physical dot, no more than 299% of Luka's attack, right? So let's just briefly dissect that, right? This physical dot, what do you know about physical dots? Well, a physical break in this game is the strongest because the way that bleed works in this game, the physical dot, is it scales off of the enemy's max HP. So the higher the enemy's max HP, the more damage the dot will do. This is important because, once again, the higher we get in the game and the higher our level is, the more the bleed proc will do. So Luka already has a lot going for him. He's physical, which is great. That means he'll automatically get the physical break if you tend to build for that. I don't even have to build for that, but you know, he'll get the physical break, he'll get the bleed, he has the bleed in his kit. Everything just kind of rolls together, right? Let's move on to his ultimate. His ultimate goes in hand with his talent and his enhanced basic attack. But essentially what this does is he receives 2 stacks of Fighting Will. Fighting Will just enhances his basic attack, which just lets him deal more damage, right? And that's basically it. That's all you need to know about Fighting Will, right? So he received 2 stacks. After 2 stacks, he can like deal an enhanced basic. And it will have a 100% base chance to increase the target's enemy damage received by 15% for 3 turns. Now, look at Luka's ultimate. This is really important. After I come from a game like FGO and Honkai Third Impact and also PGR, the way that sentences are worded and how ultimates and skills work is something you need to read and take note of. Between stipulations, how periods are and how they're placed and what it means. So Luka here, he applies his buffs first and then he attacks. Not after, but before. That means when Luka when he attacks, the enemy is already debuffed by 15%. And then he deals 330% damage afterwards. So Luka already by himself deals a lot of damage. Now his ultimate, right? The target enemy damage received by 15%. It just increases their damage received by 15%, flat by itself. So combine that with Kafka's thing to increase dot damage from all sources. When you proc Kafka and you have Luka's ult debuffing that target, that is a 35% damage increase, which can possibly go up to 55 or 60% damage increase if you combine the Eidolons and some other things within these characters' kits. The damage increase that you're getting from these two, just these two alone, is phenomenal. There is almost nothing else in the game that can compare to this. Silverwolf's debuff, right? That can work as well. But when you think about dots and you look at dots and their damage scales judging from these two characters, so arguably with these two together, they dish out more defense reduction and more defense shred and damage overall than on a team with, let's say, Silverwolf would have done. And I haven't even gotten to his Eidolons yet. If you look at Champion's Applause, you deal extra bleed damage, right? When you look at his first Eidolon, he deals 15% extra damage as long as an enemy is bleeding. All of this extra damage that stacks on top of dots, and on top of you having dots, is the stipulation, which you will always have because you're going to be upkeeping your dots. It's like these two together are simply just a dream. They're fantastic. They're made for each other. We have two of the strongest elements in the physical and lightning. These are the two that you see quite a lot. Together like this, the damage potential is definitely there for them to be the best two in the game on a team. If you were to run Luka, Kafka, well, now I'm getting the team building. I wanted to say that for a bit later, but an example would be Luka, Kafka, and Pela, right? And you can even say, you know what? I don't need a buffer per se. Let's just run a healer, right? You can do that, and the damage you're going to be doing, oof, I don't even want to like attempt to sit here and run the numbers on that damage. But Pela's defense shred is coming through. You have all of these small incremental buffs by 15, 8, 10, 20, all of these buffs from these two characters of Luka and Kafka combined, and then the 15% reduction right there. That's like what, 48, almost 50%. You see where I'm going, how it just continuously stacks up, and the damage you're going to be dealing just grows and grows and grows and grows. It's incredible how much you're going to be doing. And I cannot stress this enough. These two characters should not be slept on. These two are a must-have. If you want to run a dot team, even if you don't want to run a dot team, these two by themselves are still arguably must-haves. If we look at his talent, all it says, right? If you have the enhanced basic attack and the enemy is bleeding, boom, you deal 85% of the bleed damage just like that. It's beautiful. It is actually beautiful. Like, think about what you can do with these two characters. We look at his Eidolons real quick. Since he's a 4-star, I argue you should always think of 4-stars at Eidolon 6, since they are the easiest to get and acquire compared to 5-stars. And it's more realistic that you will get them at Eidolon 6 than any 5-star you can get at Eidolon 2. So, when you look at these Eidolons, right? His first Eidolon, fantastic. 15% extra damage against the bleeding enemy. If it hits an enemy with physical weakness, he gains fighting will. His passive, it stacks up. That means that he can always try to land his talent. More damage. Every stack of fighting will attained for 4 times, he gains 5% extra damage. 20% extra damage, just like that. This one, as I said, bleed damage. They're bleeding, extra damage. Who doesn't love extra damage? Now, for his talents, right? His traces, I'm sorry. This dispel, oh my goodness. It's Pela's dispel, right? I think Pela's has a chance. This one is just a raw dispel. I don't even need to begin to tell you why having just a I dispel you is massive. You guys already know from using Pela why that's important. Then his other ascension, he regenerates additional energy for each cycle of fighting will stacks that he gains. That's great. And his other talent just deals additional damage based on fighting will. Has to additionally consume it, which doesn't really matter. The one you want to look at is his dispel from his traces, right? And his Eidolon levels. These two are what's really important with him. So now that we discuss like these two characters, where can we look at for like set building and team comps? I guess for Relics, for Kafka, it's really straightforward. You just simply want Wild Wheat, right? There's no point of running really anything else with her. You can argue break effect, but I would still say no, because when it comes to Kafka, everything scales up her attack and literally nothing else. And you want to maximize your damage with these dots and everything. So simply build wild wheat, right? When it comes to Luka, it's functionally the same thing here. Just simply build, slap on wild wheat. You can do the physical break, not the physical break, I'm sorry. You can slap on the physical set on him, but I would argue wild wheat is more important here, just because you want to, once again, maximize the damage from these dots and all the damage that you're dealing. For 2-piece sets, you can actually have a little bit fun here. Because remember, attack has diminishing returns, right? So you don't want to run the one that boosts your attack again. You can run the break effect set here for the 16% break to help them out with break damage and improve that to guide your damage along the way. You can run crit rate or crit damage, however you're feeling. When it comes to 2-piece sets, it's a bit more flexible. You can even run energy regen if you're feeling that kind of way. I personally would probably run energy regen on Luka, because his trace right here lets him regen energy, and his ultimate, that debuff for 3 turns, I want to keep that up as much as possible, right? And you should too. But that's that for Relics, right? They're pretty straightforward. When it comes to team building, let's think about this real quick. So I brought up Kafka, Pela, and honestly anybody else, right? But what about order cycle, right? Let's say you're doing Memory of Chaos, or whatever content you seem to be doing, and you want to bring a buffer, or you want to buffer these two, and let's say a shield her. You have Japard, Yukong, Kafka, and Luka, right? This is your team. Now, these 2 characters are really interesting because you want Luka to go first. Well, you want Luka to be ahead of Kafka, because you want Luka to apply the debuffs and his bleed first, and then Kafka to go afterwards to use her skill or her ult to pop it and apply shock at the same time. So when it comes to your relic stats, we'll have to tweak with the speed. This is where tweaking with speed comes in handy. And you don't want to just flat out say, I want 121 speed, 123, 134 speed. You don't want that, right? You need to manually choose your speed here, which is going to be hard because there's of course outside sources that can boost your speed, blah, 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 blah. But for this, speed boots may not be what you want. You can go you can go for attack style boots. You can go for defense boots if you're getting shredded, HP. But don't just flat out say, I need speed, right? You don't need it. You need to figure out what works best for your team. And for me personally, I wouldn't really want to run speed boots unless I can for sure line this up perfectly like how I want it to be. Just because I get speed boots, that does not mean I necessarily will run the speed boots. If it messes up my team order and composition, I will not run it. Because you want Yukong to, of course, go first. So Yukong will have to have the max speed on your team. She will have to have, let's say, 134 speed. Max you can possibly get with her. She has her own speed increases, blah, 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 blah. Yukong uses her buff, yes? Uses her buff. You then go with Luka. Luka uses his skill, which consumes Yukong's buff. Then Kafka goes. Kafka uses her skill, which also uses Yukong's buff, and triggers the bleed, triggers the shock, and the cycle begins. Japard will then simply punch, build up his ult slowly over time. You can even use skills on top of that with Japard, because once the dots are applied, they last for 2 to 3 turns, so you don't have to continuously apply it. You can finagle with your skill points as you see fit. Remember, it's not as demanding as you think it is, and not as skill point heavy as it may seem. Like, you have room to be flexible here. That's another cool thing about the dot team. The flexibility that it brings is nice. It's incredible. I use the word incredible enough, but I cannot stress it. These two characters and what they can bring to your account, it's nice. It's truly stunning. Now, you can run something like that as a team comp, right? Where you just want to dish out damage, have, a little bit of backup with your part as your shielder. Or you can run like a more safety team where you're perfectly okay with taking your time, but you're still dishing out a lot of damage. Instead of Yukong, you can run like a healer, like Bailu. Run another support, by a trailblazer, a tank. As long as these two are on your team, the flexibility is there for what the other two characters can bring. It's whatever you think you need at that time. But a team that I would personally run, like if I'm just chilling with like regular content, like Simulated Universe, I don't have to really try that hard, think too much. I would probably run Luka, Kafka, Fire Trailblazer to gain aggro and dump skill points, like gain skill points. And honestly, Bailu, just to sit there and just realize I have nothing to worry about. There's nothing that's going to stress me. These two characters are dishing out so much damage, it simply does not matter. For something like Memory of Chaos, you definitely want to try the like Yukong, Luka, Kafka, Chapard that I said. Ayla also works as well. Because I definitely believe that this team can mitigate type advantage just because of the damage that it can dish out. Of course, you want to like match the break and blah 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 blah, but I'm definitely gonna do some tests about this, right? When they drop, I want to see how far can I get while simply saying I don't care about type advantage, because I see the opportunity to just be ignorant, and I want to take it. But that's it for my opinions and my voice on this matter. Thank you guys all for watching and staying tuned with me for this long. I know this was a pretty long video of me rambling, me ranting, but I want to get my thoughts out there about these two characters, and I want to draw some attention to them, and I want people to actually use them, play with them, experience them, and realize, holy crap, why haven't I thought of this before? Why haven't I done this before? But yeah, once again, this was just Top Deck. All the information here is speculated to change until their final release. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for more Genshin information.